Hamilton and Verstappen have seen protests, penalties, and controversial FIA checks before. But what officials found in George Russell's Mercedes after the Austrian Grand Prix may be the kind of discovery that changes how the entire paddock looks at one team. Because this is not just about Russell's car. It is about trust. Trust that the Mercedes was legal. Trust that the result was real. Trust that the FIA can still catch the difference between brilliant engineering, a dangerous loophole, and something that should never be allowed on track. And here is the terrifying part. If the FIA found a clear breach, Mercedes could be facing consequences far bigger than one race. But if Russell's car was legal, and the findings still shocked Hamilton and Verstappen, then the problem may be even more dangerous. Because that would mean Mercedes discovered something hidden in plain sight. Something the rules allowed. Something rivals missed. Something that could force every team on the grid to ask the same question. Was Russell's car illegal, or was it simply too clever for Formula One to ignore? Hamilton knows how serious that is. Verstappen knows it too. And after Austria, the FIA may have uncovered a truth Mercedes never wanted the paddock to see. Subscribe to the channel. Austria is where a Formula One race can look finished and still be nowhere near over. That is the part most people miss. The cars cross the line. The drivers slow down. The crowd reacts. The podium story begins to form in everyone's mind. One driver looks relieved. Another looks frustrated. A team starts celebrating. Another team starts calculating what went wrong. But behind the scenes, the real judgment is only beginning. Because in Formula One, a car has to survive 2 races. The first race is on the track. The second race is against the rulebook. And George Russell's Mercedes suddenly found itself in the middle of that second race. That is why this story became so dangerous so quickly. Not because every post-race check means something is wrong. It does not. The FIA checks cars because the sport has to protect the result. It has to make sure the car that earned the position on track also earned it legally. Without that process, every race result would depend on trust alone, and trust alone is never enough in a sport where every team is hunting for tiny advantages. But when the FIA finds something that makes Hamilton and Verstappen react with disbelief, the mood changes. A routine inspection no longer feels routine. A technical detail no longer feels small. And Russell's car stops being just Russell's car. It becomes a question for Mercedes, for the FIA, and for every rival watching from the garage. What exactly did the officials find? That is the first hook inside the story. Because the available source does not confirm the exact component, the exact measurement, the exact data point, or the final ruling. So the honest path is not to invent a secret device, or pretend the verdict already exists. The honest path is to understand why the question itself is so explosive. Mercedes is not an ordinary team under inspection. Mercedes carries weight. It carries history. It carries memories of dominance, precision, engineering power, and seasons where rivals felt like they were chasing a machine that understood the sport better than anyone else. So when an FIA finding appears around a Mercedes after a Grand Prix, people do not react calmly. They ask whether the team has found something clever. Then they ask whether it was too clever. Then they ask whether the FIA saw it soon enough. That is the chain of suspicion. And in Formula One, suspicion spreads faster than any official statement. One piece of data becomes a rumor. One rumor becomes a theory. One theory becomes a paddock argument. And before the FIA even explains the full meaning, fans begin choosing sides. Mercedes supporters say the team is being targeted because of its reputation. Rivals say the FIA must be strict because reputation cannot protect a car from the rules. Neutral fans ask the only question that really matters. Was Russell's car legal, or did Mercedes step into a dangerous gray area? That phrase matters. Gray area. Because not every Formula One controversy begins with a clear illegal part. Sometimes, the most dangerous questions begin in the space between what the rule says and what the rule was meant to prevent. That is where elite teams live. They read every line. They test every interpretation. They search for an opening small enough to defend, but powerful enough to matter. They do not always need to break the rules. Sometimes, they only need to understand the rules in a way nobody else saw coming. And that can terrify rivals even more. A banned part can be removed. A penalty can be served. A clear violation can be written into the record. But a legal idea that exposes a weakness in the regulations can change the entire sport. Because then every team has to react. Do they copy Mercedes? Do they challenge Mercedes? Do they pressure the FIA to close the door? Or do they admit, quietly, that Mercedes found a path they missed? That is why Russell's car matters beyond one result. Because the car is not only being judged for what it did in Austria. It is being judged for what it might reveal about the rules. Hamilton understands that better than almost anyone. His career is tied to Mercedes in a way no headline can simplify. He knows how that team works when it finds momentum. He knows how small details can create huge consequences. He knows that a Formula One car is not one big trick, but thousands of tiny decisions stacked together until the stopwatch starts to move. So if Hamilton is stunned by what the FIA found, that reaction carries history. It is not the reaction of someone who has never seen Mercedes operate. It is the reaction of someone who knows exactly how serious a hidden technical question can become. Verstappen understands it from the opposite side. For him, Mercedes has been the benchmark, the empire, the machine that once defined what domination looked like. He knows what it feels like to race against a Mercedes that has found confidence. He knows how quickly a small advantage can become a wall in front of the rest of the grid. So when Verstappen's name enters this kind of story, the emotional weight shifts again. He is not just reacting to Russell. He is reacting to the possibility that Mercedes may have found something meaningful. Something that changes the fight. Something that forces the FIA to explain where the line really is. That is why Austria became more than a race weekend. The Red Bull Ring is short, fast, and repetitive. It gives drivers multiple chances to feel what another car is doing. If a rival brakes differently, they notice. If a car exits corners cleaner than expected, they notice. If the car looks stable in places where others struggle, they notice. And when a post-race inspection then raises questions, those feelings suddenly gain new life. A driver's suspicion becomes sharper. A rival team's doubt becomes louder. The FIA's finding becomes the center of everything. But here is the danger. Feeling something is not proof. A car can look unusual and still be legal. A data trace can look strange and still have a normal explanation. A measurement can raise questions and still pass once the full context is understood. That is why the FIA's job is so important. The governing body cannot punish surprise. It cannot punish reputation. It cannot punish Mercedes simply because rivals fear what the team might have found. It has to judge the evidence. And that evidence must answer one brutal question. Did Russell's Mercedes fit the rules after the Austrian Grand Prix, or did the FIA uncover something that forces the sport to act? Everything depends on that. Because if the FIA clears the car clearly, Mercedes can argue that the reaction was built on suspicion, not fact. Russell's performance remains protected, the team's explanation becomes its shield, and rivals are left to decide whether they were beaten by normal performance or by an idea they failed to understand. But if the FIA finds a breach, the consequences become serious immediately. Then this is no longer just about disbelief. It becomes about accountability. How did it happen? How long had it existed? Did it affect performance? Did it influence the result? Should Mercedes face penalties? Should the rules be tightened? Should other cars be checked more deeply? Those questions can shake a paddock. But there is a third path, and it may be the most uncomfortable one. What if Russell's car sits in a space that is not easily explained as legal or illegal? What if the finding points toward a technical interpretation the FIA has to clarify, rather than a simple violation? That is where Formula One becomes unstable. Because teams hate uncertainty almost as much as they hate losing. A team can respond to a penalty. A team can respond to a ban. A team can respond to a clear rule clarification. But uncertainty forces every rival to make decisions in the dark. Should they copy the idea before it gets stopped? Should they avoid it in case the FIA later declares it unacceptable? Should they protest harder? Should they spend money studying a path that may vanish before it delivers a result? That is the strategic nightmare behind the Russell story. It is not only about whether Mercedes did something wrong. It is about whether Mercedes may have opened a door the rest of the grid did not know existed. And if that door is real, the entire paddock has to decide whether to walk through it or slam it shut. That is why Hamilton and Verstappen reacting with disbelief matters so much. Their disbelief is not just shock. It represents two sides of Formula One's memory. Hamilton remembers what Mercedes can build when it understands the game better than everyone else. Verstappen remembers what it feels like to fight that power from the outside. Together, their reactions make the question feel bigger than Russell's garage. They make it feel like a warning to the sport. Because the most dangerous thing the FIA can find after a race is not always an illegal component. Sometimes, it is evidence that the rulebook is not as clear as everyone believed. And when the rulebook becomes unclear, the fastest teams become even more dangerous. They do not need permission. They need interpretation. They need one sentence that can be read differently. They need one test that checks the car in one condition while the real advantage appears in another. They need one detail that looks harmless when parked, but becomes powerful when the car is alive at racing speed. That is what makes modern Formula One so difficult to police. A car in the garage is quiet. A car on track is alive. It moves. It flexes. It heats. It cools. It changes height. It reacts to air, curbs, braking forces, corner loads, tire wear, and driver input. A part that looks ordinary in inspection can behave in a more complicated way under pressure. So the FIA cannot only ask what the car is. It has to ask what the car does. And if Russell's Mercedes did something that raised alarms after Austria, then the FIA has to explain it in a way the paddock can trust. That is the next pressure point. Trust. Because Mercedes does not only need a legal answer. It needs a believable answer. Russell does not only need his result protected. He needs people to believe it was earned cleanly. The FIA does not only need to close the file. It needs to close the doubt. And that is often the hardest part. Because in Formula One, suspicion does not disappear just because an official sentence says the matter is closed. Suspicion follows. It follows the next Mercedes upgrade. It follows the next strong sector. It follows the next time Russell looks fast in a place rivals did not expect. It follows every comment from Hamilton, every reaction from Verstappen, every camera shot of Mercedes mechanics covering part of the car in the garage. That is how one post-race discovery becomes a shadow. And Mercedes knows how dangerous a shadow can be. You can fight another car on track. You can fight a poor strategy. You can fight tire degradation, traffic, track limits, and even a bad qualifying. But fighting suspicion is different. Suspicion does not need proof to damage confidence. It only needs unanswered questions. And after Austria, the biggest unanswered question is painfully simple. Did the FIA find something that threatens Russell's result, or did it find something that threatens Formula One's understanding of Mercedes? That is where the next part of the story begins. Because once the FIA opens the door, the paddock does not just want to know what was found. It wants to know what it means.